From athletes to authors, entertainers to innovators, we connect with those who help shape our culture. Join us in revealing stories of their lives and backgrounds, their triumphs and tragedies that molded them into who they are today. Authentically off script and personally illuminating, this is Audibles with Jason Scarborough. This week on Audibles, Dickie Scruggs, Part 1.
So Brookhaven, Mississippi is where we start writing your story, and you're born there, but you grow up, spend a lot of your time in Pascagoula. So how would you describe those early years of your life?
Gosh, Huckleberry Finn. I had a great childhood in Brookhaven. That's where my family, at least my mother's family, for many, many generations before statehood, were in that Lincoln County, Copiah County area. And so I was one of the neighborhood kids, born in 1946, right after World War II. The only downside of that was that my mom and dad got divorced when I was very young, and my father moved to Texas, which is where his home was. And I saw very little of him for the next until he died when I was 10 years old, and he died prematurely of a heart attack. But other than not having the benefit of a two-parent family, it was a good existence. I had fun there, and just did what kids do. It was a really nice time. Brookhaven, it was a real leafy, friendly community. Most of the families there had been there for generations, and everybody knew everybody, and nobody locked their door at night, that kind of thing. And I lived only a block from the elementary school there. And so I'd walk to school, eat, and back every day, come home to eat lunch, which we called dinner in those days. Mm-hmm. The evening meal being supper. But it was fun. We had little neighborhood clubs, boys clubs, and played pranks and things like that on the neighbors, and just had it was a more or less idyllic existence, really.
You talked about your dad not being around.
Right.
Now that you reflect back on that time, or do you ever reflect on what kind of impact that made on you as a child, or did it?
Yeah, well, it probably made a pretty good impact on me, probably more than I can even realize now. I was one of the few kids that I knew that didn't have a two-parent family. Mm-hmm. It was rare. Divorce was rare in those days, and so that made me feel a little different from my friends, but my family was fairly well known there, and I was accepted by everyone, and I never consciously worried about that, other than when somebody asked me what my daddy did, and I'd have to say, well, I don't know, I don't know, because my parents are divorced. That was always a little bit awkward, but it wasn't anything that I can recall depressing me to any degree.
You had the influence of your uncle, Bill Fulton. Spent a lot of time with him.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So spent a lot of time with your uncle growing up. Like a father figure to you in a lot of ways. He had a couple boys.
He was my mother's younger brother, and he had 3 sons and a daughter. The baby was a little girl, and I was a year or two older than my oldest first cousin, but they moved to Brookhaven when I was in grade school, and my mother got a job at the Ingalls shipyard as a legal secretary, which gave her more economic opportunity. And so she moved when I was beginning the 6th grade, and then so I finished the school year out living with my uncle and his family in our house in Brookhaven. So my uncle was a wonderful guy. Was on the school board there, and prominent man, and was the only father figure I really had growing up.
Talk about your mom. She was a stickler for doing things the right way, working hard, taught you how to be a gentleman,
She tried.
holding a fort
She
properly.
did her best.
All of these
Yeah.
different things she was a stickler for. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am.
She
Early
taught me
on,
manners and insisted on.
how would you characterize how that impacted you, her just being a stickler for those things?
Well, I think any child with good manners is well thought of, and I did my best to present good manners from, hold the door for ladies, rise when a lady comes in, all those sorts of things. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Just common decency that manifests itself in good manners. And so she taught me the value of that, and I've done the same with my son Zach, and he has with his son Jackson, who's a freshman at Ole Miss now. And I constantly get compliments on Zach and on Jackson for their manners, and I thank my mother for that because she taught them to me.
What were the high school years like for a young Dickie Scruggs? I got to know.
Well, I went to military school my last 2 years of high school, and what was then known as Georgia Military Academy on the outskirts of Atlanta. It's now called Woodward Academy. It's a well-known prep school, but it was military then. And my last 2 years of high school were there, and it was like a military school. I mean, it was, strict, but it really that more than almost anything changed my life because of the peer pressure there. Unlike public high school and Pascagoula, the peer pressure there was on going to college, making as good a grades as you can, scoring high on the SAT or ACT. It was a different, there was emphasis on sports, but the kids there were mostly from prominent families who had been very successful financially. As you can imagine, they could afford the tuition there. I still don't know how my mother was able to pay the tuition at that school, but the peer pressure made me focus more on academics my last 2 years of high school and making a good score on a college entrance exam, because that was where there was nobody in my graduating class, for example, that did not go to college at the military school. And I'm sure that there were a great many that didn't in the public high school I went to in Pascagoula. And I'm not knocking that school. It was Pascagoula is a working man's town. It's a blue collar town, and many of the kids that I was in school with there couldn't wait to get a job at the shipyard where they can make good money. And I don't blame them for that. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So going to military school helped me raise my sights.
So in 1965, you enrolled at Ole Miss. And at the time, from what I remember, Ole Miss was the only school that had a liberal arts program and a law school in the state. Was that the biggest draw for you to Ole Miss, or what other factors drew you to Ole Miss?
Actually, that's not what really got me interested in Ole Miss. It was their football team.
Yeah.
One of my mother's brothers, a different uncle from the one we talked about, went to Ole Miss and had been in the SAE fraternity at Ole Miss, and had been roommates with a former Mississippi lieutenant governor who's deceased now, named Carroll Garton, who's a William Winter type figure in the day. And so anyway, that put the name Ole Miss in my head. And although my mother went to Millsaps, I'd always kind of pulled for the Ole Miss football team. And some of the stars on the Brookhaven High School football team when I was younger were playing at Ole Miss. And so that got me interested as well in following their careers. And so that's why I wanted to go to Ole Miss. And it had nothing to do with academics at the time, although I always wanted to go to law school, and Ole Miss had a law school. But that was not high on my list in 1965 when I came to Ole Miss.
Now you earned the nickname Zeus while at Ole Miss. I got to hear the story. How'd you earn that nickname?
Well, it's a very derisive nickname. I have to tell you. It was my second or third year at Ole Miss, and some of us were getting ready to go pick up our dates. We were at the fraternity house in the bathroom, and everybody was saying, "Man, you look pretty rough," you know, and insulting each other like guys do in a locker room sort of setting. And I looked in the mirror and I says, "Well, you Greek god, you don't ever die, you know, just." And so one of the characters in the fraternity came down and told everybody that he caught me in the bathroom looking in the mirror and talking to myself, calling myself a Greek god. And so somebody said, "Well, you think you're Zeus," and so that stuck, and so I couldn't live it down, and so that's how I was known. But it was not because anybody thought I looked like a Greek god. They thought that I thought that, and so I mean, it got to the point where I'd call a girl for a date and tell her I was Dickie Scruggs, and she'd say, "Do we know each other?" You know, and she'd say, "Oh, Zeus, oh yeah." So, I'm still busy. It didn't help me, but yeah, that's how I got that nickname.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
The internet can be a dangerous place. With Connect and Protect from C Spire, you get the phone you want, and you get the tools to easily track her location, restrict content, and help protect her at any age. It's like a digital mom arm.
A what?
The thing moms do.
I'm not following.
How do I put this? Look out!
Oh, mom arm. Got it, yeah.
Introducing Connect and Protect from C Spire. Only $30 a month with free guided setup. Customer inspired. That's C Spire.
The fabric of any community is its people. It's the commitment to hard work and to be our best. It's where you know your neighbor by name. It's where family is important. At Covington County Hospital, we are your family and friends. That's why your healthcare is important to us. From emergency room visits to primary care to behavioral health, we want to make sure that healthcare is available when you need it. Covington County Hospital, where your healthcare matters.
"100 years ago, there were a lot more of us. Today, we're using the latest technology to make sure not one seed, not one drop of water, not 1 inch of this farm goes to waste. We want to be here for the next generation of Mississippians, ours and yours. Donate at farmfamiliesms.org to help us spread the word, or find us on Facebook. The Farm Families of Mississippi, our work fuels the world.
Family owned and operated since 1986, Lakeside Molding has become the trusted source of architectural products throughout the South. They offer fine interior architectural moldings, custom millwork, and cabinet doors designed and handcrafted in Flowwood. Their showroom on Lakeland Drive is stocked with today's most sought-after interior details, including corbels, post, fireplace mantles, bath vanities, mirrors, and much more. Tim Shoemaker and his staff work closely to meet client needs for new construction, restoration, and remodeling projects. Lakeside Molding, where details make the difference.
In 1969, and then you say, "Hey, I'm going to fly A-6 bombers in the Navy." Like, what in the world, like, motivated you or led to you wanting to do that when you got out of Ole Miss?
That was not how my mind when I came to Ole Miss. But in those days, in all land grant colleges in America, able-bodied young men had to sign up for ROTC for at least 2 years. It was or face the draft, which was, you know, Vietnam was just getting started then. It wasn't something that was on anybody's mind that I knew in 1965. The war was going on, but it wasn't drafting a bunch of people that I knew. But you were required at Ole Miss to take 2 years of ROTC, and because of the Navy presence in Pascagoula, where they built Navy ships, I just signed up for the Navy ROTC program at Ole Miss. And it turned out, I thought I made a mistake there because most of the guys in the Navy ROTC program were on scholarship, and many of them were from other parts of the country. A lot of Yankees, as we called them, and they were serious about ROTC. Hell, I'd just come out of military school for 2 years. I didn't want any of that stuff, you know, that Mickey Mouse drill and all that. I did it, but I didn't like it. But after 2 years, then Vietnam was really getting heavy and people were getting drafted. And so I decided to go what's called advanced, do the last 2 years of ROTC so that when I graduated the same day I got my degree, I would get a commission in the Navy. And then my last year at Ole Miss, the summer between my junior and senior year at Ole Miss, I was required to go on a training cruise for the Navy, and I was sent on to an aircraft carrier out in San Diego that was operating out of San Diego, and just before it went back to Vietnam. It had just come in and was going back to Vietnam. So I got to know a lot of the pilots out there on that carrier, and I said, man, you know, I looked at them like people look at Tom Cruise and Top Gun. It was, I want to be that guy, you know. Navy lieutenant with wings was God, you know, and got the girls, got everything. So I want to do that.
So the time as a Navy pilot aboard the USS Roosevelt, I mean, the thrill, I read about the thrill of the speed and the missions and the, you know, coming off the aircraft carrier. It was exciting for you, but, you know, you mentioned that a little bit ago about the reality of war. You actually had someone that went to Ole Miss with you that you lost, that you came in contact with, a former classmate, lost his life in an exercise there. Then at that time, the reality starts to set in, and at 27, you're like, okay, I'm done. So take me through the decision to finally walk away and say, okay, I'm going to get out of this at 27.
Diane, my wife, was, you know, she really wanted me to get out and go back to law school. And we had a son, and it was, Navy life was tough. Separations, you know, to succeed in the Navy particularly, you've got to have a lot of blue water in your record. You've got to go to sea. That's where you advance. If you don't go to sea, you don't get promoted. And so, but that necessitates separations and family stress. And so we just made the decision to come back to law school at Ole Miss. And that's what I did. But I continued to fly in the Navy Reserve. I was on active duty for 5 years, and then I flew for 4 more in the Navy Reserve. They had a squadron up at Millington, at the Naval Air Station in Millington, Tennessee, which was an easy trip on weekends for me to drive up from Ole Miss. And so I did that while I was in law school and made a little extra money as well.
So you mentioned your wife and wanting you to get out of the Navy, but it was because of your time in the service that you kind of ran into your wife again. You knew her from high school. You ran into her at a post office in Pascagoula.
Yeah, that's right. We met right after I moved to Pascagoula. It was just before the start of the 7th grade for both of us. And she and one of my friends, I joined the local swimming team down there in Pascagoula. And it was a co-ed swimming team. And so there was a girl on there that was just, I thought, the prettiest girl I'd ever seen that I was hitting on, but wouldn't have anything to do with me, but liked my buddy on the swimming team. But he didn't like her because he had another girlfriend. He was telling me that he said, well, you see my girlfriend. She's not on the swimming team, but she'll be at the pool after a while, you know. So a couple of days go by, and then this skinny, blonde-headed girl walks in, and he says, hey, man, that's my girlfriend. And I said, you got to be kidding. I said, you could have Jeannie, this other girl, and you want her? She's so skinny. Well, that was Diane. That skinny girl was Diane. And so anyway, we knew each other for all through junior high. We were in the same homeroom. Her last name, maiden name is Thompson and Scruggs. So S and T, they grouped your homeroom by an alphabetical brackets. And so she and I were in the same homeroom for like 3 years, but never really, we ran in totally different circles in high school. And the next time I ran into Diane, I was a junior at Ole Miss. It was during the summer between sophomore and junior year, and I was the escort for a girl in the Miss Hospitality contest, a girl from that I'd known at Ole Miss, and she had asked me to be her escort in the statewide Miss Hospitality contest in Biloxi, and Diane, it turned out, was Miss Hospitality for Pascagoula, and was there, and I hadn't seen her since, 5 years maybe. And I said, man, goodness, she is gorgeous. This girl has really come a long way, And but she was, I thought she was kind of stuck up, as we used to say, and just kind of, aloof. And she was friendly, but not too friendly, And but she was dating another guy who was also in Navy ROTC at Auburn, and Diane went to Southern Miss. So we weren't in school together. And so I didn't see her again for 2 more years. And then right after I'd graduated from Ole Miss and she'd gotten out of Southern, I was at the post office in Pascagoula, actually writing a letter to a girl I'd been dating at Ole Miss, and ran into Diane. And we started chatting, just, how you doing? What are you doing? And so we had mutual friends in Pascagoula. And so anyway, I took a chance and asked her for a date, and she turned me down twice because she was actually ending a relationship with a guy, and with this guy that went to Auburn, and who was also in Navy flight training, like I was. We were both over at Pensacola at the same time. But anyway, she turned me down twice, and I said after the second time, I said, well, look, the 3-strike rule. She said, well, call me back, and things may change. And so the third time I called her, she went out with me, and that started it. 2 years later, we got married.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history, as I say.
Well, you decided to go to law school. 1976 is when you enrolled in law school. After being
Actually, 74.
74.
Right.
So after being a pilot,
yeah,
and then going to law school. I got to think law school at this point is a breeze, right, compared to what you've been
No. It was. I hated law school. I hated every day of law school.
Why is that?
Oh, I just did. Well, after 5 years of being out of an academic environment, and I remember coming back to start law school in August of 1974. It was hot, and I'd been given this immense amount of homework to do. It was very stressful in that in those days, the Ole Miss Law School had to take almost anybody that graduated from Ole Miss. There wasn't a big break. They had to accept a lot of people, but they didn't have to keep you. And so about half our class either left or flunked out before the 3 years was over. And so the peer pressure again was immense. And I was thinking to myself, I made a huge mistake. Here I am back in Oxford, Mississippi, which was it wasn't what it is today. It was just a country town. And I was thinking, 2 months ago, I was flying off an aircraft carrier, and it was not a care in the world except, flying that airplane. And now I'm back here unemployed with a wife and a child, and this is and with all this hard work, and but nevertheless it worked out fine, and I studied hard and did fairly well in law school.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
C Spire's Viber makes it so easy to make music on my computer. I was on Discord in real time, and it was like that. It's like that. It was exactly like being in the studio. From just the tap of the button, I can just transfer files or send over projects, send over anything. It's just something I don't need to worry about. I'm just like, I have the creative side, and C Spire has got the whole internet side.
The fabric of any community is its people. It's the commitment to hard work and to be our best. It's where you know your neighbor by name. It's where family is important. At Covington County Hospital, we are your family and friends. That's why your healthcare is important to us. From emergency room visits to primary care to behavioral health, we want to make sure that healthcare is available when you need it. Covington County Hospital, where your healthcare matters.
Mississippi's farmers love what they do, producing food and products for you and your family to enjoy. But we know this land is not just ours, it's yours too. That's why our farmers maintain this soil, keeping it rich and bountiful. We are sustaining this land so it will be useful to feeding generations to come. Donate at farmfamiliesms.org to help us spread the word, or find us on Facebook. The Farm Families of Mississippi, our work fuels the world.
One of your first jobs in the legal profession, you worked in Jackson, and you had a couple of jobs in Jackson for a couple of firms. Honestly, from some of the things I've read, it just for you wasn't inspiring. The work that you were wanting to do just wasn't inspiring, and you were sent to Holmes County to defend a case against a power company, and the power company, you remember the story better than any of us, and so I remember reading that ride home from Holmes County that day. You said it was the longest ride of your life at that point.
Yeah.
You didn't have any success in the case, but something started to kind of burn within you. And I'm wondering, and I wanted to ask you since I read that, was that kind of the inspiration for what your career ended up being? Was that kind of where it started on that ride home from Holmes County that day?
Well, it was, I'd lost that case, and it's a case that ordinarily you wouldn't think it could be lost. And I realized that it was a lot more to law practice in the counties of Mississippi than what you learn in law school. So it's a humiliation for me to get beat like that. And but that lesson stuck with me for quite a while. To go back to your premise, I went to work for a law firm in Jackson whose senior partner was William Winter, it was between his lieutenant governorship and his governorship. It was during that 4-year interim there, and he was always my inspiration politically in Mississippi. And so when he came up to interview law students with another young lawyer, I signed up and was lucky enough to get hired out of law school to go work for his firm. And I did that for 2 years. I was working mainly with another partner there who was a pretty irascible old guy, and I didn't get along with him at all. Nobody did, but I particularly didn't get along with him. And I was a little more mature, I guess, from my Navy experience than a lot of young lawyers, and I just wasn't going to take his BS. And we had a confrontation, and I decided I was going to leave. I didn't get fired, but it wasn't going to be a pleasant place to stay. And so I switched law firms, went to work for another firm that did mostly insurance defense work. And that, I learned a lot, but it wasn't all that fulfilling, I didn't think, defending insurance companies, who seemed to want to deny coverage no matter what the circumstances were, and then try to beat down the policyholder. And so that's kind of my introduction to that side of law practice. But the Holmes County case that you're talking about was against a lawyer named Don Barrett. And the Barrett family are the preeminent family in Holmes County. And you know, Don was the scion of the family and a lawyer, and he is about my age, and we were very close friends and have been ever since that. But that jury there was a unique jury, and I didn't have a chance. I didn't know I didn't have a chance, but I didn't have a chance. No lawyer like me would have had a chance coming up from Jackson trying a case in that county, because those jurors were all captive, is a polite word, I guess, the most polite word I can think of that law firm, of that family firm there. And so I years later, Don Barrett in Holmes County decided he was going to take on one of the tobacco companies for an African-American gentleman who had died of lung cancer. And Don represented him and his family and sued American Tobacco Company. And I was wondering, okay, I remember my experience in that county. I wonder if that magic will also work with the against the tobacco companies who had never been beaten in court. And it ended up in a hung jury. And I remember going over to Destin, where Don was soaking his sorrows over there from having lost that case. Or he considered it a loss. He didn't lose it, but it was a hung jury, so it was a mistrial. He would have to try it again. And so he considered that to be a loss in his hometown. And so I went over and commiserated with Don for a couple of days to find out what had happened and how come the jury didn't do what he expected. He said, "You won't believe what the tobacco company did. They went down there and hired every ex-politician, every preacher, every physician in the community as jury consultants, and essentially fixed the case. Bought the jury out from under him. That's what they had done. It wasn't like they'd paid the jurors off individually. It was just that they had hired all the influencers in the community to pretend to be on the side of the tobacco companies, and it resulted in a hung jury. And it was so outrageous. I couldn't imagine that happening. And so the next time Don tried a case, we're getting up in the early 90s now. After Asbestos, I'm jumping over a lot of things. But Don let me come up and try a case with him in Greenville. And the same thing happened, except we lost the case. The same game plan by the tobacco industry. And so I learned a lot about what they're willing to do to win. And so that informed our later decision of how to beat big tobacco in court.
So eventually you moved back to Pascagoula, open up your own law firm, big deal. Mm-hmm. And there's a shipyard worker at Ingalls Shipyard that approaches you, feels like he's sick, and from asbestos possibly. And eventually, that happens in 84, eventually it leads to in 85, and I said, I've got to ask him about this. You set up a clinic for dozens and then hundreds of people to get tested by a pulmonologist to see if they had indeed been subjected to asbestos poisoning. Could you have ever, first of all, brilliant. I wanted to tell you that was brilliant that you did that. How in the world did you come up with that?
Before you give me too much credit, I didn't set up a clinic. The clinics already existed. It was actually a pulmonologist over in Mobile, which is only a 45-minute drive from Pascagoula. And his head nurse was a young lady I went to high school with and was friends with. And so she told me how I should refer potential clients for a test at that clinic. It wasn't a clinic that I physically set up or paid for. It was already going. Mm-hmm. This was a doctor's office. And I started, I'd had a shipyard worker, a gentleman who had been a welder, a few years older than I am, but had been working in ships his whole life and was having breathing difficulties. And called me up one night and asked me if I were taking asbestos cases. And actually, he'd been a juror on a case that I had tried and lost. I'm talking about all my losses here. I tried a case in federal court in Biloxi and lost. And that night, when I was on my second gin and tonic, trying to drown my sorrows, the phone rings, and it was this gentleman on the phone. And he said, "You know who I am?" And I said, "Well, your name is familiar." He said, "Well, I was on your jury over there in federal court." I said, "Really? Well, you got the wrong lawyer. I lost that case." He said, "No, I thought you did a good job. I want you to represent me in an asbestos case." And I told him I had not done it before. This was like 1983. But I called around a couple of lawyers I knew and said, who are the doctors that can evaluate? And they told me this doctor in Mobile. And so I called the doctor's office to set up the appointment for the gentleman. And my high school classmate answered the phone. And so we started, catching up. And then, so anyway, I sent him over and he was diagnosed. And I paid for the physical. What I did not know was that the other lawyers in town who were taking asbestos cases were not paying for the examination out of their pockets. They were asking the clients to put the money up, which was $200-300 a lick, and a lot of those men didn't have that kind of money. So I ended up borrowing money to send people to the doctor, but it paid off handsomely. It was a good investment, and so after several years, I represented over 3,000 shipyard workers. Now we probably tested 15,000, and luckily many of them were not sick, at least with asbestosis. But that practice built from 1983 all the way up through for the next 10 years, and that's where the action was in trial work in Mississippi. It was asbestos.
Did you ever think, any time during that process, was there ever a moment that you kind of had an inkling that was going to turn into what it did?
You mean in terms of the tobacco?
The asbestos
litigation?
the asbestos litigation. When, I mean, that was,
No.
You don't really like the term, big lick, but I mean that was.
No, at the time, it was still risky litigation in 1983. It was still had a great deal of risk involved. You could lose those cases, and but I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'd Pascagoula, where I'd spent most of my high school years, in summers in college. And in fact, I'd worked in the shipyard 2 different summers, just to make to make tuition at Ole Miss, and. So I knew the working conditions down there that these men had endured, and which gave me a leg up as well, because I'd actually been there, and seen what the conditions were. And so it was just fortuitous that I was in Pascagoula and at the right place at the right time, and that litigation caught fire. And so it built on itself. And interestingly, ironically perhaps, one of the interesting facets of asbestos litigation was pulmonary medicine, because the asbestos companies defended these cases based on the fact that the worker smoked, and most of them did. So you had smoke injuries to the lungs as well as asbestos, and they tried to make it look like the worker wasn't really hurting from asbestos. He was hurting from his smoking habit, and they were trying to lay it off on tobacco. And so the lawyers like me who were dealing with these asbestos cases had to learn a lot about medicine, about lung medicine, to be able to cross-examine their doctors when they tried to put it all off on smoking. And it's a different signs and symptoms from what smoking causes to what asbestos causes, and you had to learn the difference.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
The internet can be a dangerous place. With Connect and Protect from C Spire, you get the phone you want, and you get the tools to easily track her location, restrict content, and help protect her at any age. It's like a digital mom arm.
A what?
That thing moms do.
I'm not following.
How do I put this? Look out!
Oh, mom arm. Got it. Yeah.
Introducing Connect and Protect from C Spire. Only $30 a month with free guided setup. Customer inspired. That's C Spire.
It has often been said that home is where the heart is. It's where hard-working and dedicated people form the fabric of a thriving community. At Covington County Hospital, it's our priority to help keep our community safe, healthy, and moving. With our primary care clinics and services, we are working to keep you healthy. Because home is where the heart is. Home is where family matters. Covington County Hospital, where your health care matters.
So the crusade against the asbestos industry, it was such a success in '93. You guys take on Big Tobacco. You're hired by your old college buddy, Mike Moore, who is now the Attorney General for the state of Mississippi. You assist Moore in a lawsuit against 13 tobacco companies. Now, correct me if any of this is wrong, for state-borne health costs. It was a giant undertaking that really at the time it was unheard of, if you think about it. And it was such a concerted and well-executed effort, spanned several states, eventually led to, I want to make sure I get the date right, June 20th, 1997, the agreement with Big Tobacco is reached. $368 billion of a payout over a 25-year period. You know, I'm leaving a lot out. There was a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into this. So I've always wanted to ask you, when it was finally a done deal for you, what emotions are you feeling? What's going through your mind?
Ironically, I smoked a cigar.
Celebratory cigar?
The night we inked the $368 billion deal. What a hypocrite, right? But it was quite an undertaking, and it was one of those crusades that where the stars and planets all lined up for us. And one of the things that there were several advantages that came our way, not things that we planned for, but took advantage of. One was that the National Press Corps hated Big Tobacco, mainly because stories that outfits like 60 Minutes and 2020 and these investigative journalistic programs on network television would run an expose of some kind of the tobacco companies, and they would immediately get sued in North Carolina or some hometown of Big Tobacco, and threatened with ruinous judgments, and ended up having to settle with them and make apologies and things like that. But it didn't sit well right with the National Press Corps. So we were their fair-haired boys and didn't even know it. Anything we screwed up didn't get reported or got put back on page 8 or 9 somewhere. And if we had a victory in the litigation as we went forward, it would be, on page 1 above the fold. It was one of those, we thought we were magic, because we kept getting this good press and didn't quite understand at the time why. Another thing that came our way was some whistleblowers, some people that had worked in Big Tobacco who knew what was going on, knew how they were manipulating the nicotine content, the bioavailability of nicotine, and some who had some very, very incriminating documents that Big Tobacco had generated internally and had tried to get rid of. And so the whistleblowers and the documents that came over the transom, if you will, were a huge benefit to us in the litigation. We really needed an insider in big tobacco to, a whistleblower, if you will, to help us there, and we had several. And so the word got around that we were, that we would pay the defense costs of any whistleblower that came over and helped us, and we'd hire lawyers for them, and so that, you know, that spawned more people to come out of the woodwork. The legal theory we used had never been tried before. We represented a state to get medical costs that the state had to bear for indigent smokers, people dying on Medicaid and Medicare, but mainly Medicaid, that the state had to pick the tab up for, with federal money as well. And the amounts of money were enormous. We're in the billions of dollars of all the litany of diseases that smoking causes. And so by bringing suit on behalf of the state, we were not faced with the assumption of the risk defense that tobacco used against an individual smoker, saying, well, you know, you knew that cigarettes were dangerous, and you smoked anyway, and you kept smoking, and everybody told you not to, but you did it anyway. You know, the state didn't smoke. They just had to pay for this risky behavior that the tobacco industry and their smokers engaged in, and externalize the cost onto the taxpayers. So that was the legal theory we advanced against tobacco, and it was novel. Nobody had ever done it before. And then one of the companies, one of the smaller companies, after 2 years of litigation, decided they wanted to settle with us. And it wasn't because they were afraid of the litigation. This is really worthy of a segment in itself. The company that wanted to settle with us was Liggett and Myers. They made L&Ms and I think Cool cigarettes, but they were like, they had about 5% of the total market, whereas Philip Morris, for example, had 50%. R.J. Reynolds had 25%. Liggett only had about 5%, but it was the tobacco industry had always maintained a solid wall of defense. They would never settle. They would try every case. They had never lost a case, and so they weren't about to start settling any lawsuits. And all of a sudden, this one company decides it wants to settle. And there was a lot of Wall Street, they had a lot of Wall Street angles for wanting to settle with us. But we didn't care. When we settled with them in the summer of, in the fall of, in the spring of 1996, after 2 years of litigation, it was front page news on every major newspaper in the country, and led nightly news that a tobacco company had settled with the state attorney general. And at that point, there were only 5 states involved. Within weeks, we were representing 25 states. The states just piled in and piled on the big tobacco companies, and we were the beneficiaries of that. And so over the next year, it became a critical mass where they were trying to defend cases in 50 states. And people were either using us as lawyers or using our materials and our legal theories. And so that's what drove the companies to settle. And that was a long process too. That was about a 6-month negotiation before we finally inked that. But it was quite a heady time. It was it was big time litigation.
Right. We're ready. I've got my timer and everything.
Look at you, ready to go. Just flip the page and starting all over at segment 1 again. All right. I'm ready. 3, 2, and 1.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another episode of Audibles with Jason Scarborough.